accented meaning simply something different from your own accent, because we all have accents. So when I say accented, I actually mean simply someone who sounds different from you. And we haven't learned those skills. So that's the work that I've been doing. You mentioned the program I did with NASA. The main focus of that was to help raise awareness about the biases that exist within ourselves when we hear someone who sounds different from ourselves, but also how to better understand, how to be more familiar with different sounds and different accents so that we see them as simply different systems of speech and not as markers of education level or background or socioeconomic status or all the great things that we love to assign to the way people sound. And those are skills that we have simply never learned. We aren't aware of the psychological processes that are happening when we are trying to process speech that is different from ours. And there are several things happening. And that's where we need to start doing the real work.
Welcome to the Coaching Studio, the podcast that dives deep with the brightest minds in coaching, psychology, and organizational leadership. You'll hear intimate, thought-provoking conversations with thought leaders and the rising voices shaping the future of human development. Expect real stories, lively conversations, and bold ideas. Whether you're a coach, therapist, leader, or lifelong learner, you'll leave each episode with new insights and renewed inspiration. Join in and let's see where the conversation takes us. Welcome to the Coaching Studio. I'm Lyssa deHart, and I am so happy to welcome Heather Hansen to the show. I first came across Heather's work at ICF Converge in San Diego. Her keynote on accent bias really stuck with me, making me think more deeply about my own blind spots. Heather helps global organizations build cultures where people don't have to mute themselves to be taken seriously. Her work sits at the intersection of global communication, accent bias, and linguistic inclusion. What happens when someone's competence gets judged through the filter of how they sound? She is the founder of the Singapore-based Global Speech Academy, an external trainer with the National University of Singapore Business School Executive Education, and a PhD candidate in linguistics. She was named to the Thinkers 50 radar in 2024, and she's recognized for her work on addressing accent bias at NASA. Heather is the author of Unmuted: How to Show Up, Speak Up, and Inspire Action, and she has a new book coming out, Accent Matters, a practical guide for reducing accent bias at work. And because I love the human details, she's a former competitive swimmer who swims twice a week, and she loves reading on rafts, and she's even designed a floating reading platform, which sounds fabulous. And it sounds like such a brilliant idea. So Heather, I am so glad to have you on the show today. Welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much, Lyssa. What an introduction. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm very excited to have you. I love the map behind you. You are a world traveler, from everything that I can tell about your impact in the world. You're a globe setter. I'd love to start off with how you ended up competitive swimming to here you are, really diving into ideas around accent bias and how important words are. I'd love to hear just how did you get from there to here?
Yeah. Well, from a very young age, I was always a talker. So it all started there. I've always been very gregarious, very talkative, the motor mouth of the family. And that just developed and developed and developed. Through high school, I was a competitive speaker. I was nationally ranked. I did speech and debate all 4 years of high school. And then went off to university with this deep interest in language, but also a deep interest in all things international. And I ended up studying international studies, and I created a self-designed major in basically a linguistic anthropology degree, so language and society. I was already super interested in how we were using English as a bridge across cultures and languages all over the world, especially in the business world. And how did that work for people, and what kind of power structures developed because of that? And so that was one of my undergraduate degrees. The other was German language. And through my German language degree, I was studying abroad and I was doing internships. I met my Danish husband in a bar in Switzerland. And then the rest is sort of history. I graduated, I moved to Denmark to be with him. We were there for a few years. Then we came to Singapore, and that's where I really started my work in the field. I found out that professional speaker was an actual job. That I'm like, wait a second, hold on, that's my one natural talent. I can do that. And I started looking into that, and I was looking for, how could I bring all of these passions of mine together? The first job that I had in Singapore was working for an English language firm that was training pilots at Singapore Airlines in how to give better public announcements. And so I had a background in English teaching at that time, and I was very interested specifically in phonetics and phonology. So how we speak, how we create the sounds of speech. And so that was the first big gig that I had. And we trained 1,800 pilots there back in 2006 to 2007. And then from there, I broke off. I started my company, Global Speech Academy, in 2007 here in Singapore, and have been doing this work ever since, working with, global professionals and multinational companies who need to speak and present for their companies, who need to represent the company on global stages, internally, externally. And the role that language plays in that, the role that accent plays, and how they can meet the expectations of different audiences all over the world, regardless of their language backgrounds. Mm-hmm. And that's the big challenge that I think keeps me very interested in the field, and led me now to go back to do the PhD specifically in accent bias, because of what I see happening globally in the workplace, and how it can hold certain people back, but how it can also propel other people forward, including myself, and with the accent that I have. But I'm sure we'll dig more into these little details.
Definitely.
Yeah, but that's sort of the long story, as short as I can make it. Yeah.
Well, I think it's really, I think that was beautifully done. Thank you. And it gives us sort of the arc of your interest. I'm always fascinated. In my undergraduate, I did a lot of anthropology also, and just the fascination in the things that move human beings and cultures. And so I really appreciate that. When you think about, like you were talking about in your first book, well, not your first book, but one of your big books, Unmuted, this idea of how people need to learn how to unmute themselves, basically speak up and be leaders. Where did that idea come from? What were you seeing that was really triggering this interest?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was actually in the process of writing a different book when Unmuted was born. I was supposed to be doing an update of my first book, Powerful People Skills, and it was supposed to be placed in the digital age. And then the pandemic hit, and we went on to all of our video calls, and all we heard on every single call was, "You're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute, you're on mute."
I love that.
And then one day I remember just sitting there thinking, you know what, this was happening long before the pandemic. There were people sitting on mute all the time in meetings, in their families, in their relationships, in society. We have always had people sitting on mute, but now it became crystal clear who those people were. And that was what got me starting to think about this concept around unmuted. At the same time, I was dealing with the frustration of being a corporate trainer who gets phone calls every October from companies and HR directors saying, we want to, develop our people. We want to make them amazing speakers. We want people to speak up in the workplace. Will you come and do a one-day training on presentation skills? And it's like, it's not that easy. I can't snap my fingers and give people some skills and then turn around your company and we have everybody working well together. That really isn't how communication works. And so Unmuted was really my way of trying to develop a framework that could be applied that had more to do with communication than simply the individual self-confidence. Because I think we love to stick a Band-Aid on people and say, here, we're going to make you feel more confident and give you more skills, without looking at the other parts of the equation. And so the unmuted framework deals with conscious communication. So our ability to read the room, know when it's appropriate to unmute, when it is appropriate to mute and listen, what the cultural norms are in our different groups that we're a part of, so that we're more conscious of how the communication is flowing. We have that in addition to our own confidence, our self-confidence, our skills confidence. And then we also have connected communication. So how much do you feel like you belong? Is there psychological safety? Can you speak up? So it's a Venn diagram of those three. And of course, if you're very connected and very confident, that little overlap, you tend to be too loud, right? You forget the conscious side. You interrupt, you break cultural norms, you talk over people, and you're missing the conscious part. But if you are confident and conscious, but not connected, that's when you tend to press mute because you've tried speaking up and people shoot you down, or they say that's a bad idea, or the boss keeps saying no to everything you say. And you finally say, forget it. I don't need to speak up. I don't need to be engaged. I don't need to be a part of this. But then, another dangerous one is you're very connected and you're very conscious, but you're lacking the confidence. And then your voice is normally too soft and you need to turn up the volume a bit. So the book Unmuted was really trying to show this larger picture of what real communication is like, that it's not only speaker based. We put so much emphasis on the speaker, what the speaker should do to be heard and how to speak so people want to listen. And we forget about the other side of how to listen so people want to speak, how to create an environment where people feel connected, and also how to develop our skills in that conscious communication bubble of culture and awareness, self-awareness and awareness of others. So that's what Unmuted is all about. Not only how to speak up, but also how to know when not to speak up, when to listen, how to communicate in a way that can get the job done in the best way. Yeah.
As you're saying that, one of the things that's kind of coming up for me is this idea of emotional intelligence to some degree, but it's really more like relational intelligence, being able to, whether it is read the situation, read the room, read the group.
Yeah. And even cultural intelligence. I mean, when people think about cross-cultural communication, the focus tends to be on simply, oh, the Japanese are like this and the Americans are like that. And that's good. That's good to know. But there's an actual field of cultural intelligence. And I've had the honor of studying under the woman who developed this field, who is a Singaporean, and the Center for Cultural Intelligence is here in Singapore at my university. And that part of cross culture is just the cognitive part. That's just, what do you know about culture? And that's fine, but you need to have metacognitive intelligence. You need to be able to think about those differences in the moment and know how you're thinking about it and know what to do with that knowledge. And then you also need to know how to behaviorally change and adapt your behaviors to fit. And you finally need to have motivation. So having cultural intelligence is a 4-part puzzle, and we tend to only talk about the differences and not how to then manage, handle, and be motivated to work with people who are different and adapt to those behaviors to make that work. So I think there's a lot of things that we forget as we follow the trends and the interesting fun parts of, oh, wow, how interesting. These people are like that, which also isn't always true. I mean, when you're really living and working in an international environment like Singapore, people rarely match those norms that you're told they should be like. So it's quite interesting when you get out in the real world. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point also, which is I think you can make sort of generalizations, I guess, about different cultures, although I would say I find that to be less true the more I spend time with people. People really are so uniquely themselves, and they're going to show up differently in different situations. And so where they may be really quiet in this situation, they might be really loud and singing songs and like dancing in front of a bunch of strangers in another situation, right? And not at all shy. So I think it's really the kind of cultural identity of each of us individually also that has to be taken into consideration. And I think of it from the perspective of like coaches going in and working within organizations where there's more than one cultural group that is maybe primary. And so I worked for the US military for 7 years. And I met people from pretty much every religion, every cultural background, every identity. I mean, there was just a lot of diversity in the military, and learning to work with people who are different, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it takes that experience to really understand how important those differences are and how they can play different roles in our conversations and in our teamwork and getting things done. And I love what you said about how, different situations can change the way people show up. And I think this is really true when it comes to language. I lived in Denmark a combined 8 years. I had a 4-year stint where we left Singapore, we went back and then came back again. And I had 4 years before we came out here. And so I speak Danish quite fluently. I'm decently confident and yet nowhere close to where I am in English, right? So I often tell people in Denmark, if they have never met me in English, they don't really know me because I'm not as quick to raise my hand. I'm not going to volunteer to do the presentation. Whereas in English, I have zero problem with that. And I'm the first one to stand up. Yeah, I'm like, me, but in Danish, I'm very, very different. And it has a big effect on how I show up and interact. In that unmuted framework, I'm definitely softer in my voice. Whereas in English, I definitely tend to move to the too loud space at times if I'm not being fully aware, although I try to remain in that solidly unmuted place. But I know that I can easily, if I'm not really paying attention, move into the too loud space. And I'm the complete opposite in Danish. I really am. So it's about remembering that. I had a client, part of a big international organization, and they had a big event where they brought everyone together. And instead of, they showed a video of different leaders in the company speaking. And instead of asking all of them to speak in English, which was totally normal for the organization, they had them speak in their native languages and they subtitled them. And my client, who's also a top leader, she said, it was so amazing to see them, watch them, listen to them speaking in their native languages. They were like completely different people. Suddenly she saw them in their full confidence. It's just a completely different power that they brought in front of the camera instead of having to sit there and struggle and be a little nervous about, oh, am I saying this right, in front of a camera in a foreign language, even though they're totally fluent, typically confident in a business situation. But it's really different when you suddenly have a camera on you and the whole company is going to watch it. So just that alone is such a lesson in remembering, even when we're using language and somebody is speaking a language that isn't their first language, that just that little element can really change the dynamics of the conversation and the personality of the person, the way you view and perceive them.
Yeah. I have on several occasions, and in fact, I just did this last weekend. So I have a cousin in Germany who German is their first language. My cousins speak English, but it isn't they speak German, right? And it was funny. We were just talking on Sunday, and in the conversation, she was really struggling to come up with a word, and it was like she didn't want to continue saying it, whatever it was we were talking about. She was like, we should just stop the conversation because I don't know what I'm saying. And I was just like, that's fine. Or say it in German. I don't speak German very well, but she said it in German. And there it was, that confidence that you're talking about. She just, like, right. And it was good enough for me to figure out what she was talking about. So it worked out. But I think what you're talking about is that energetic shift when people are in that third circle of confidence, along with, they know something, they're in the right environment for it, and then they've got the confidence to say it.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. So I know that there was the unmuted element, and then your work started moving into accent bias. Talk about what shifted in your focus, or maybe they're connected, and I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, actually, I would say accent bias came first,
Oh,
but
did
I suggested the book that I'm working on now, Accent Matters. I originally went to my publisher with that book 2014, I think. But it was, and I even said it at the time, I said, this is my book. This is the book I want to write. But the world isn't ready. The world doesn't understand it yet. There's, and I've watched this industry shift over, the last 20, 25 years, the whole English teaching industry. And in 2018, I did my TEDx called 2 Billion Voices, How to Speak Bad English Perfectly. And the whole point of that TEDx was about pushing that argument that there is no one standard perfect English. That is not the way English is used in the world. That when we meet people all over the world, the way we speak and use the language is going to shift and change depending on who those two people are that are using it. And the way that we are teaching and testing and preparing people to enter the world with this feeling that they need to sound like the native speaker is not correct. And it's not the way the language is used. We're teaching very specific grammar rules, which can be different in British versus American English. I mean, which standard are you choosing? And then which accent are you teaching? And all of these things. And so my personal learning journey has shifted over time because I was originally educated that way as well, that we have to teach the standard English. And I loved pronunciation and phonetics phonology, but all the CDs that came with the books were in British English and it didn't sound like me. So am I supposed to teach them the British English, or can they sound like the way I sound? And then imagine someone who comes from Germany who is an English teacher and they have a different accent and their accent sounds nothing like anybody in any of the books. Then what do you do? Right. And we're training people to pass tests so that they can enter universities or they can get a job, and they have to prove that they have a language level that these tests have shown they have. And so we're in this big, big system that is supported by massive publishers, testing industries, teaching industries. And I don't feel, and I haven't felt, and there are many, many, many people who agree with me that this is not the right way of preparing people to use English in global settings. And because, I'm very specifically interested in English in global settings. My company is the Global Speech Academy because I am only working in situations where we are communicating across languages and cultures. And there could be someone from the US or the UK in that conversation. And then how does that change the dynamic? When we have in Singapore, we can easily sit at a table. Today, I'm meeting my client from Colombia. I mean, it's from all over the world. You have a Colombian, someone from China, someone from Korea, a Brit, and a German all sitting in a meeting together at work. Yeah, that's a truly global setting, and the English used in that situation is not textbook, proper, perfect English. It is the English that will get the job done. And it's the English that will connect them across all of their cultures and identities. And so that is how my journey started shifting. And when I first started talking about these things, it was in 2010 that a client said to me, he was, president of Greater Asia for an American multinational, wanted me to help him with his articulation as well as presentation skills. And I noticed in our first consultation, grammar issues. And I said, what about your grammar? Do you want to take a look at that? And very, politely pointing out that maybe he should look at his grammar. And he said, my grammar? I don't care about my grammar. As long as they understand me, that's good enough. And I thought, I was shocked. As an English teacher, I'm like, stab me in the heart. What do I do? But then I realized, I said, yeah, he's right. He's absolutely right. Like, who cares if he says he work with me or he works with me? Everybody understands. Yeah. The job gets done. Does it really matter? It doesn't matter. But we love to be the grammar police. We love to use language as a tool of power to keep people in a position that is lower. And that was the whole reason he wanted to work with me, because he said, everybody in Asia, no issue. But when I speak to the board of directors in America, they don't take me seriously. Mm-hmm. And I feel like they don't respect me. And he was running like the largest financial profiting bit of the company, all of Asia. I mean, he really had a larger job than any of them. And that's how we use language in that way. And so these issues of language and accent I've been thinking about studying, teaching my whole career, and I've been dealing with this hypocrisy of someone coming to me saying, I need to sound like you so I can succeed in my job, so I can get the next promotion, so that I can get the international posting, or HR coming to me saying, we really want to promote him to C-suite, but we don't like the way he speaks, which, by the way, is exactly like the HR person calling me and exactly like everyone else in Singapore. So what is the problem? Um, and so I need to do something with that individual to help them succeed in an environment. And at the same time, I'm battling this system where I'm saying, but why should he have to do that?
Yeah.
Why does he need to sound like me to succeed? This is a hierarchical system of power that is global, a global language ideology that we carry. And unfortunately, accent, even in the conversations of DEI, that's when we first started hearing about accent bias. And this is, from 2020 onwards. So it's very, very recent that the mainstream, this has been a topic of academia for 100 years.
Mm-hmm.
But in the mainstream, we've only talked about accent bias since around 2020. And accent in language is not a protected characteristic. Races, national origin, if you can prove that they were discriminating against you because your accent identified your national origin. Well, what about a regional accent? I mean, before we started, you were telling me you grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
That regional accent has the same stigma, and someone could be discriminating against you because of that stigma. Well, you have no recourse under the law, because what's your origin? It's American. It's Texas. I mean, can't get more American than Texas. Come on. And so you have no argument.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is, this whole field has been my deepest passion for a very, very long time. And it is part of Unmuted as well. I do talk about language and accent at a more superficial level in a couple chapters. I was able to sneak it in. The publisher was like, this is getting too linguistic-y. They made me cut a bunch of it. I'm like, fine, I'm saving it for the next book. And then, so that has been developing under the surface for a very long time. And now I'm finally at a point, and the world is at a point where they're understanding it, and they aren't just fighting me on it every time I open my mouth. When I say, there isn't one standard English, there's an army of English teachers and academics who support that idea now. And we didn't have that before. So it was very difficult to start those conversations. Yeah. So I've just been waiting, slowly waiting. And I think the time is now. And that's why I said, I'm going to go back to the PhD. I have way too many questions that aren't getting answered that I want answers to. There aren't enough people researching it. It is a quite wide field across several disciplines, but we need more research in the field, and we need more people talking about it now. And it's starting, it's getting there. So it actually came before the other parts of the puzzle. So it's a good question.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating too. I mean, and it's clearly a passion for you, because you got very passionate as you're talking about it. I think I can tell you care about this. It's sort of funny. Like, I did have that lived experience of, going into a place where everybody spoke in a certain way. And I came in talking like this, and I was like, hey y'all, and going, oh, I need to change myself, because this just doesn't feel good. Like, it's funny, but it's also kind of not funny. And so I think that sense of like and I do think that in some ways it didn't mute me too much, because I'm a little bit like you. I'm like, I'll just talk anyway. But it did start me thinking about, like, how do I need to change my accent so I don't sound like this? Because obviously I did, because I don't sound like I'm from Texas. At least I don't think I did.
Yeah, you fully changed it. And I mean, have you ever considered going back to that when you go back to Texas, to fall back into it? But when you talk to your family?
Yeah, no, I when I'm around people like in Texas, or I'm talking to like my brothers or my brother, but if I'm talking to people with a really strong accent, but this is where it took me. I became very much of a chameleon to fit in, because I went from Texas to San Francisco. And then I was going to a school that was an inner city San Francisco public school that had 12 white kids, and the rest were Asian and Black. And so there was a whole different language, of the way people used words. And I just became very much of a chameleon to fit in wherever I was. And I find I still do that. So I think I was telling you also before the show that when we go to Europe or we go to places, I pick up the accent. I'm speaking English, but all of a sudden I sound like I'm from someplace else. And I can't even help it. Like, I don't even know how to go back to my own accent until I'm out of that situation where everybody's talking in an accent. So, but it does make me think so much also about, like, what is the line? Because if I'm speaking English and I have a really strong accent, like whatever it is, it doesn't even matter. And people aren't taking me seriously. Sort of, what is your thought on how do you, because we're not going to change the whole world tonight, I mean, or today. And maybe over time we'll have more of a broader perspective on our awareness and consciousness about these biases that come up, whether you sound like you're from Texas or Singapore. What is it that we need to be paying attention to for ourselves so that we can find that middle path for ourselves where we're not completely muted, but also taken seriously?
Yeah. And that's the struggle. I could talk about this the rest of my life. I'm going to barely make a dent, barely make a dent in raising awareness around this topic. And that's this line of hypocrisy that I always feel, because yes, they come to me and they say, I need to sound this way because I'm not being taken seriously. I need to fit in. I want to belong. All of these different reasons that are very, very valid. And on the one hand, I think, who am I to tell you you can't, because you're just trying to fit into a system that, well, I created, right? I mean, my language group, my nationality, my linguistic heritage has created this global system through colonization, through imperialism, through Hollywood. We have created a system where a certain type of English has prestige and is the norm. And therefore, when somebody comes to me and says, well, I want a piece of that, I want to sound like that, who am I to say, no, you can't? I'm basically recolonizing. I'm saying, no, you stay where you are. Because I can keep the power up here because I'm the privileged one. So I don't really have a right to tell people you shouldn't want that, because of course they want that. How else can they succeed in the world as it is now, the reality of their workplace? So I have to help them in some way. But very honestly speaking, being able to change your accent from being Singaporean to being American or British, it's not going to happen. That does not happen. Some people are very, very gifted in this. It sounds like you have an excellent ear for this and you're able to sort of pick up these accents. For most people, that's not the case. I certainly cannot do that. Even though I study it, I know the sounds, but I cannot produce them. I'm really horrible at it. My girls who have grown up with a lot of languages around them, they're much, much more fluid. But for me, I absolutely can't. And I mean, my American accent in Danish and German is horrific. It's really, really, you know immediately where I am from. And so I get it. I really get it. And then at the same time, I'm working, on raising the awareness with everyone else to say, because we have never learned the skills to understand accented speech. Accented meaning simply something different from your own accent, because we all have accents. So when I say accented, I actually mean simply someone who sounds different from you. And we haven't learned those skills. So that's the work that I've been doing. You mentioned the program I did with NASA. That was one of the main focuses. The main focus of that was to help raise awareness about the biases that exist within ourselves when we hear someone who sounds different from ourselves, but also how to better understand how to be more familiar with different sounds and different accents so that we see them as simply different systems of speech and not as markers of education level or background or socioeconomic status or all the great things that we love to assign to the way people sound. And those are skills that we have simply never learned. We aren't aware of the psychological processes that are happening when we are trying to process speech that is different from ours. And there are several things happening. And that's where we need to start doing the real work. At the same time, our person who is trying to belong, in the work that I do with them, I'm looking at the limited research we have globally in phonetics and phonology, sociophonetics, around what sounds are more difficult for people to understand, which sounds are easier for people to understand in global contexts. Can we work on those particular sounds to make sure we're articulating them clearly? We don't need to change full accents. We just need to raise your confidence around producing these sounds, knowing why someone might misunderstand or not understand, and knowing how to fix it in the moment. So it's raising that metacognitive awareness on the side of the speaker to be like, okay, where am I now? Why are people misunderstanding me? Is there a way for me to shift my articulation in certain ways if I'm in front of those audiences? What will make the biggest shift? You know, for many American and Brits, we have some research showing that it's the intonation patterns, the patterning, the stress patterns that can have the biggest influence. Okay, let's look at that. So moving from ba 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 to da 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 da, right? Trying to make those kinds of shifts. It's not so much focused on accent. It's about, you know, articulating a T versus a D, for example, so they don't sound the same, or a P and a B, so we get pop instead of pop. Very, very minor things that can make a larger difference in the grand scale when someone's trying to listen and understand, to just increase the ease with which someone understands. And that's what we're focused on, because you're not going to sound American tomorrow, or British, or whatever you're trying to do. That's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Well, and it's making me have greater appreciation for all of the foreign films I watched through my youth. And I mean, and I still absolutely love foreign. Honestly, this is sort of a like, nobody knows this but my husband, but I love like Danish and Norwegian crime shows.
You're so good.
I love them. And just like, I just find them wonderful. And I don't speak Danish or any of the Nordic languages. But I'm quite capable of reading subtitles. So I love, though, listening to different voices and different sounds. There have been several Indian movies I've just adored. And I love listening to them, as they're speaking, and many of them in English, right? And so I think I'm appreciating all of the foreign language or foreign shows that I've watched that have helped me tune my ear. It's hilarious that my husband and I will watch something like, I don't know, rock and rolla, some sort of like English, some British show, and everybody's talking really fast and sort of some like mob style English. And my husband's like, how do you understand anything that they're saying? And I'm like, I don't know, too much Benny Hill. I don't know. But I think there is something to practicing listening with our ear to tune our brain so it's not so much work to understand. I think also, and since this podcast has a lot of coaches who are listening to it, one of the things that I'm thinking, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is also how else are we listening to people? Right? Is it only the words that they're saying, or are we also listening to energy? Are we listening to the tone, the pace, the other elements? Because I think those things are going to be important in the way that we listen as well, but I could be wrong.
No, absolutely. You're absolutely right. We have vocal elements like the pacing, pauses, intonation, pitch, and all of these parts are giving meaning. They're providing meaning, and you're assigning meaning to them. So, and mainly because we speak the same variety of English, American English, that when I go up on a word, I'm stressing it, I'm emphasizing it. So I say, oh, it's such a huge difference. Huge difference. I go up, I lengthen it, I make it louder when I want to emphasize something or add passion or energy to it. that's what I do. And that's a very, very subtle signal that you've learned throughout your entire life that people will do. And you are then able to recognize, oh, she's emphasizing something. Oh, that's important to her. Oh, she's showing passion there. And if I were to do that on words that you weren't used to, for example, in Indian English, they use that pitch and that pitch change and tonal changes in a completely different way. And that is actually what confuses a lot of Americans or Brits when they listen. It's like, whoa, the ups and downs are so different. Was that something important? But that didn't sound like an important word. Did I miss something? And then they've moved on and you're saying, whoa, slow down, slow down. They talk too fast. They don't talk any faster than we do. But we're confused with the patterning, with the ups and the downs. So we're absolutely listening to much more than just the words. The words are there, but then we have layers of meaning we put on top of the words. We question, why did they choose that word versus another word? So just in the words themselves, there's multiple layers of meaning. And if you think of sarcasm, right, that's the words aren't matching the tone or the delivery of the words. So we can get different meanings for the same words just by changing our tone, changing our emphasis, changing our energy. So of course, we're listening to all of that. Pitch, and we're assigning meaning to it. If you just hear someone on the phone, you will be able to immediately hear. People who are listening to this and don't see me right now, they have a picture in their minds of what I look like. They have probably determined my race. They have assigned a gender to me. They have a general guess at my age. We've also talked about my education levels, but based on the words I use and the way I speak, they would guess my education level. That also has to do with the pace of my speech, how quickly I talk, how often I pause, how many fillers I use. So you're absolutely right. I mean, we take all of the information we're receiving and assign multiple levels of meaning. And that is completely based more on ourselves and the lens through which we see the world and our life experiences than the person and what they're saying. So two people can listen to the same speaker and walk away with very, very different impressions, very different understandings. And that's because we're viewing them and adding meaning and perception based on our own experience, our own lives, our own language use, and how we see the world. And that's what makes it so absolutely fascinating and also incredibly complex and difficult to detangle.
Excuse the quick interruption, but I wanted to make sure you knew about my monthly Coaches Q&A. Join us on the third Monday of every month. We talk about all things coaching. We have coaching demos. We discuss the competencies. Really, no coaching topic is off limits. And we have an added networking event at the end of every session. So come find your people and be a part of this community. I want to see you there. And on that note, let's get back to our regularly scheduled programming. Yeah. And I'm just thinking also, like, as you're talking, the fact that we're wired so strongly for certain things, and those become our preferences because our brain has heard it so many times, then we hear something that sounds different than that. And we go, one, oh, that's different. And then two, to your point, I wonder how many times we are taken completely out of presence by the way somebody said something that's different than we're used to hearing it, that we now aren't even listening to them and we wonder why we don't understand them.
Yeah. And that is really, really typical in the beginning of a conversation. And I mean, I know this from my own experiences in Denmark, because I look Danish, right? My ancestry, my dad's side is Norwegian. I have a lot of Scandinavian features other than my height. I'm very short, but otherwise I appear to be Danish when I walk into a room. And then the minute I open my mouth, there's this massive disconnect because they're going, wait, you look Danish, but you don't sound Danish. And wait, what was that I heard? And where is she from? And now they're struggling. They have to get me into a box before they can continue the conversation with me. And I almost can't ask anything without being derailed with a, wait, where are you from? Or them switching to English. Or it's like, no, I'm speaking fluent Danish here. We do not need to change languages. Like, who told you we needed to do that? But they're just trying to make sense of who I am, where I'm from, why I'm there. They want the whole story, right? Which in the beginning, that's kind of fun. You get some nice attention. But after you've lived there for 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, and you're still getting that at the beginning of every conversation, that's when you start to understand how it becomes more of a microaggression. That's where you really understand what exclusion is, because you come to a realization that, well, I could live here the rest of my life. I'm never going to belong. They will never view me as Danish. They will never just have a normal conversation without pointing out my accent, where I'm from, wanting my life story, and the expectation that I should provide a life story that's none of their business. Um, and yet we do this all the time and say, but I'm just so curious, and I'm just so interested. And we have zero negative intentions. But if you flip the situation around, you can see so quickly how it can become very, very tiring.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really hadn't thought about it like that. And I really appreciate that perspective on where are you from. Because to your point, I don't think there's any negative intention. It isn't intended to be a microaggression. And the first couple times somebody asks you, it may feel good, yet 8 years in, it's like, here we go again. I'm
Or
from,
people who are 20 years in, I
yeah,
mean, 30 years in, who have lived in
yeah,
America, 30 years, they still
yeah.
have an accent. They're
Yeah.
always going to have an
My
accent.
grandparents still had an
Hard.
accent, and I know that they were very insecure about, to your earlier point, like they weren't necessarily ever going to be the people who are like, we got an answer anyway, but they had their friendship circle, and they spoke English, but they mostly spoke German with each other and with their friends, and very strong accents, and just really it kept them very much shut into a very small, talk about putting people in boxes. It is like a very small world that you live in as a result, where only putting yourself in the circle of people who also sound like you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which
So
is,
we tend to
oh,
self-select that at times because it's more comfortable and we don't have to go through the explanations every time. And then you're accused of not integrating, but it's going both ways, right? And yeah, it's really, really difficult when you're actually in the situation on the other side. And I think that's part of the problem as well for a lot of English speakers, is that the great, great majority of English speakers are monolingual. They don't have experience in other languages. So it's very difficult to have the true deep empathy for the situation when you haven't experienced it yourself, right? When you don't truly understand the extra mental load of speaking in another language all day, every day, of, battling these kinds of linguistic barriers constantly. The amount of time it takes me to write an email in Danish versus English, and all the second guessing and the trying. AI, I think, is really, really helping to make this a little more even across the board for a lot of people. But there's other challenges, going into that's a whole nother conversation. But yeah, we definitely look for the easier ways, right? And when you haven't experienced this, it's very difficult to have that empathy and understanding for what it's truly like. I wish that foreign language education was taken more seriously in the English speaking world. It makes sense why it doesn't. We've created a system where English dominates, so there isn't a lot of motivation to learn other languages. And that's really the main thing you need to learn a language, is motivation. And yes, we might have 2 or 3 years of high school Spanish or German or French, but then it ends, right? There are very few who continue with that language learning. Because again, what is the motivation for that? Now with AI, is the motivation even less, right? And
yeah.
maybe we start seeing people say they aren't motivated to learn English. Already we have translation tools, we have accent translation tools in AI tech, that learning another language at all isn't really going to be necessary in another 10 years. So the linguistic landscape is going to change very, very quickly, I think. Not only in the monolingual English world, but internationally too, I have a feeling.
Interesting. So as people have their phones, right? And they're like, "Oh, I can just pick up my phone and use Google Translates or whatever." what do you see as the sort of things to keep in mind? I'm not even sure they're concerns, but maybe they are, but things to be mindful of as a global citizen if what we go to is there isn't there we're all just using our phones to interact with each other in order to to communicate because they're I don't know. I mean, I'm like, that's fascinating. I
Yeah,
had not even
yeah.
thought of that, Heather. You've now just put another thing in my brain.
Well, the technology already exists. It has existed for a number of years. It hasn't been integrated into the business world as yet, although we're seeing this happening more now. But already there are apps where you can download an app, do a video call. I can speak English to you, and you can speak French to me, and you will hear my English translated and with a perfect, meaning prestige, most commonly normed French, Parisian French on your side, and I will hear you speaking English to me in the accent of my choice, likely a general American or a received pronunciation British accent. This technology is already here. And it is only going to get better and better. I mean, AirPods now, you have it built in. So you just press a button on your phone. I can speak English. Someone can speak Mandarin to me. I'll hear them in English. They'll hear me in Mandarin. There are many issues to still be worked out with this. Of course, the most dominant languages are the only ones that can use these apps because they don't have large enough language models for smaller languages, less popular languages, smaller populations. And so that creates massive inequality. Also issues around accent bias, which accents are available. So yeah, I can choose to hear you in a general American accent, but I can't choose to hear you in a Texan accent, for example.
Well, good, because I don't speak like that anymore.
Yeah. But if I live in Texas and that's how I speak,
Yeah.
and someone who is listening to me, so there's these kinds of accent issues as well. But if we take this to the extreme and say we work out all these issues and we get to a point where we all just have a little, thing in our ear and we speak our own languages and they're instantly translated, the other person hears it perfectly in the accent of their choosing, then the new challenge becomes cultural. It becomes cultural awareness. Because when we hear someone who sounds like us, we assume that we have the same type of cultural perspective on the world.
Yeah.
So we say, "Oh, you sound like me. You're speaking like me. You have the same confidence as me." There is no language barrier here. Therefore, there must not be a cultural barrier here because we link language and culture so closely together. So this is the challenge I see as we perhaps, if we do go this direction, if we do get the tech to work this well, and nobody wants to learn languages anymore, we're still going to need cultural intelligence. That is going to become so much more important because you're going to have to understand that just because they're saying these words, they may mean them in a very, very different way. Mm-hmm. And they could be putting the sentence together differently. This translation could be interpreting it differently. We have to also learn a different way to communicate using our idioms, metaphors. I mean, I know you do so much work in mm-hmm. metaphors. We will have to seriously reconsider how we use those in order for translation systems to work correctly. Will the translation systems be able to pick those up and translate them appropriately into another language and culture? Will there be, that's where we have the biggest hiccups still in translation technologies. So, I recommend that people try to avoid idioms, cultural expressions, because they do not translate well with or without technology. Mm-hmm. So this whole area opens totally new and different doors of challenges and issues. We could also see that being multilingual could become very, very prestigious as more and more people choose not to learn language. And perhaps there will be a new place, a new role for people who do speak multiple languages and do not need the technology. Maybe that suddenly means that you earn a much higher salary, or you're seen as higher educated, or you're given a much, much higher social rank because you have that ability, which potentially fewer people will have. Mm-hmm. So it's I find it really kind of intellectually stimulating to think about, what are the different ways that we could go with this and what's happening. But the tech already exists now. I mean, there's even accent translation technology in call centers in India and the Philippines, where the agent calling Joe in Minnesota can press a button, speak Indian English, and it sounds
Like
like
Joe
American
in
English.
Minnesota.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
someone in Minnesota. So that they aren't being harassed on the phone, so that it decreases the ease of communication, so that the person, the client customer, is not struggling to understand. So it's meeting them where they are, because
Mm-hmm.
they can't expect Joe in Montana to meet the Indian English speaker where they are. And it's been very, very successful so far. These tools have been incredibly successful in retaining the call center agents, decreasing the harassment that they endure, and also allowing them to hit KPIs that they were never able to hit before. So they're able to earn more, provide for their families. There are serious ethical questions coming up with all of these tools, but I think in the long run we need to look at who are they benefiting,
Mm-hmm.
and how are they changing lives, and is that the right direction to go? But it does bring up many other questions.
I mean, I can really see the upside of some of it. I mean, wouldn't it be fabulous if everybody you spoke to, you could understand them? To your point, there are going to be nuances that do not make any kind of sense whatsoever. On the other hand, being able to basically communicate with the majority of people would be really kind of stunning, and to be able to communicate back to people without, in your confident voice, with your kind of,
Yeah. With your natural energy,
yeah, with your
right?
natural
I
energy.
think that's really interesting. Like, I would love to just look at someone who is speaking Japanese in their, the full embodiment of themselves and their confidence and their culture, and expressing themselves fully without any kind of barrier of, insecurity of, is this right? Am I saying it right? Is it the right thing? And I just want to see them in that state, right? So I'm very excited by
I
the potential
I
of,
have to
of
say,
experiencing people that way.
yeah.
But again, it depends on how you also define identity and language. I mean, um, it's interesting because, my husband has spent so many years now using English as his primary language at work. When he's in work situations, he's much more comfortable in English than Danish,
Hmm.
because most of his vocabulary has been learned in English. He
Hmm.
doesn't even know the Danish words. I mean, he's been working out here since he was 30, and his whole career has been in English. Um, and so I think even if he had the choice, he would prefer to use English. So, okay, do we how much is our identity tied to that first language? Can we become more attached to a different language? It's very context specific, right? I
Hmm.
mean, when he's home with us, he's mixing in and out of Danish and English because we all speak both. And so we go in and out of the languages constantly, without even thinking.
Hmm.
But in a work situation, he would immediately want to speak English. Even when he's in Denmark, he still wants to write emails in English. And people are like, why are you writing to me in English? So there's a lot more to it than
Yeah.
just that, because it depends how you feel in different languages and how you express your identity through languages. And that can be very individual.
Well, and you
Yeah.
said something earlier that I think is the flip side of this too, which is that's so exciting, that idea that we could, it's kind of like the Tower of Babel, right? Like all of a sudden we could all speak to each other again, no matter what we were, the language we were bringing. But I think there's also the piece about the assumption of sameness that you talked about, and just the dangers inherent in assume. And I mean, for coaches, one of the things I often talk about is assume nothing, always test hypotheses. So for me, when a thinker client brings a metaphor or an idiom or something into a conversation, I will ask meaning if I think it's useful. Otherwise,
Yeah.
I'll just roll with it because a lot of times it doesn't matter whether I really understand or not. And then there are a lot of things that, regardless of your culture, they're cross cultural experiences. So, like, I don't know, uh, uh, being underwater. Most of us, like you're a swimmer, most of us have had that experience of maybe being underwater, not in a terrifying way, but we've had that experience, and so we can appreciate that there's an experience happening there. We don't need to know necessarily the details, and we can go, and if you weren't underwater, what would have shifted, right? And the person can tell us, and they'll give us something else, and we just go with the language they've brought in to the conversation. But and I agree. I think it's going to be really tough for AI to be able to nuance out the differences of all the different ways people use languages, all these different languages and cultural ways of using words. But I think that assumption of because you sound like me, that means we must be the same. And all of the inherent assumptions that human beings already do. And it kind of takes us back to the beginning of the conversation where you were talking about conscious,
Yeah. You
right?
have to be so aware, so aware of what could be happening within the words and the sounds, and both from what you were producing, but also what the other person is, to bridge any gaps.
Mm-hmm.
Most people don't even notice when a misunderstanding is occurring. And and that's especially true in global workplaces. And I think a lot of it has to do with, people who speak English as an additional language can speak it so well and so fluently that as monolingual speakers, we forget that they are actually going through a filter, that they could be translating words, that maybe they did use a word differently than we would normally use it. And when the misunderstanding happens, we don't even realize it's happened. And
Mm-hmm.
we aren't very good at checking for the understanding either. We do make that assumption that everybody's understood, or we end the meeting with everybody good. Everyone knows, yeah, yeah, yeah. Everyone says, yeah, 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 leaves the room and does the
And
opposite of what you thought, right? Like asking, do you understand what I'm saying? It is not necessarily going to get an honest response, first of all. Or even if someone thinks it's an honest response, that they really thought they did understand, but really they didn't.
mm-hmm.
So it's about really asking for, what does this mean to you? Or what is your next action step? What are you going to do after this meeting? What are you taking away from our conversation today? Those kinds of questions to get them to actually give you their understanding so that you really know. What the next step is, what they have taken from it. And I think coaches are excellent at this, in finishing the coaching conversation by having the individual
yeah,
really
what have you
explain
learned
back.
today? What are the
Yes,
things that you're going to play with between now and next session, which gives that
exactly.
person that agency to name it for themselves? It's interesting. I was having a coaching conversation with somebody whose accent I could not understand. And I asked they understood me because they were multilingual while I am not. And to your earlier point, but I just followed the energy and asked the questions, and they had a great session, and I could tell by their energy. I would just be like, what happened there? Like, and what did you learn? And those questions help them to anchor it. And so I think there are places where we don't need to understand completely
Mm.
and let
Yeah, and
go of
that's
that need
interesting.
to be
Yeah.
like, I have to understand you, because it's in the coaching, the thinker's work is not my work to do. So I don't have to stop them and be like, can you explain that to me? Because that would seem like you didn't have the correct grammar when you said that. Because that's going to just be like, what? But yeah, this is fascinating, Heather. And really these elements that have both the sort of the positive side of understanding each other in a global way, but also misunderstanding each other, because half the time we're not really listening to one another anyway when we're talking.
It's true. You have me really thinking now. I think that's so interesting. You're making a really interesting point about, in this coaching conversation, the need to not need to fully understand. And that is a fascinating approach, actually, because so much of my work is so incredibly focused on intelligibility, understanding. We need to have understanding, right? And, if we take the coaching conversation and move that into the business world, where more and more people are embracing a coaching approach to leadership, it does put the question out there of how much do you really need to understand? How much does a person have to explain themselves to you in order for you to simply accept what it is that they're expressing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a really, really interesting direction I haven't thought about a lot.
I mean, if they've got
But I find that
PowerPoints,
fascinating.
you can follow what they're saying,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, you don't have to have every single word, and I would agree there. I think in the business world, a lot of people would push back on what you're saying here, but I think there's merit to it, because everything is so detailed and so specific. But I think there are definitely situations where
Right.
you do not need to have that level of intelligibility
Right.
to understand someone. And I think it's already happening a lot in global settings where we don't necessarily understand every word on both sides, yet we understand the general impression, the general concept, and that is really enough. We're able to get the job done. And to that degree, yes, that's sort of what I promote as well. But I think you're taking it a little step further, which I find really, really interesting. So I'm going to be thinking about that quite a bit.
We can have other conversations
Thank you
about
for
this
that.
also. But I
Yeah.
think there is a place where we really need to understand. Like if you're walking me through how to fix a problem on my computer, I
Right.
can't generally understand. I need to really understand what I need to open, what I need to click, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I think there
Mhm.
are a lot of conversations where really understanding what's being spoken to you is super important. I think though that when it comes to being a more of that coaching mindset,
Mhm.
we're going into that conversation with a very different purpose. We're not
Yes.
there to explain anything, and we're not there to fix something for somebody, right? So
Mhm.
the rationale is that we're there to support their thinking. So the more we get in the way of their thinking and stopping them and interrupting them in order to explain something that is unimportant to them other than in the context it was in the flow of their conversation, then we become disruptive. And I think kind of going back to that, where are you from, like we don't think of it as a micro expression, but if every time you're trying to say something somebody interrupts you with their curiosity or their
Mhm. Mhm.
confusion,
Yeah.
or their assumption that they know what you're talking about, which is something I like have to work on wildly because I'm like, yes, yes, yes. And I could be wrong.
Yeah.
And just, like how do we really work to consciously listen
Yeah.
and maybe
Yeah.
even tune our ears to a broader spectrum of tonality and
Mhm.
languaging and communication styles. I think
Yes.
it's an opportunity for us to really grow and develop ourselves as
Mhm.
well, whether we learn the other language, because apparently we'll be able to listen on our iPod 3s to somebody in real time, but all the other elements to what they're talking about are still going to be there.
Right. Right. Yeah. So it really
Fascinating.
does come back to that conscious listening piece, and knowing how to choose. Am I saying this or asking this? Who does it serve? Right. And does
Right.
it serve the goal of the conversation to make this statement or ask this question? Or am I doing this for me more than them? Keeping in mind why you're there and the context, right, of what you're doing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Absolutely.
being able to withhold judgment, not adding that extra layer of meaning to the style of speech, to the speaking, right? Oh, they're talking so slowly, they don't know what they're talking about. Oh, they don't, they aren't confident because they're speaking this slow. Or those are the kinds of mental jumps and gymnastics we're doing when we listen to someone, and we have to stop ourselves from making those kinds of assumptions, of assigning meaning that isn't necessarily there,
Mhm.
and being aware that we're doing it in the moment, which most people are completely unaware of that. And that's kind of the first step
I think
is
it's that
understanding
self-awareness.
when you're doing that and why.
Yeah, I think that piece around the self-awareness part is so
Mm,
crucially important because
mm,
you're right. If we don't start with our own assumptions in the moment when we're having them and learn to turn them down so we can be really present with the person we're speaking with, how on earth are we going to be able to understand other people? And I mean, I did marriage counseling as a therapist for years. And I mean, you don't have to be, you could grow up on the same block and have this problem. Um,
yeah, absolutely.
oh, too funny.
Absolutely.
Heather, this has been so much fun. You haven't really talked about like some of the things that like books that have influenced you. If you had, I mean, I'm going to have links for your books. Are there any people or books that you would recommend for people who are interested in developing more insight around their own listening styles?
Wow. Specifically that. I mean,
Well,
I
not
do have,
necessarily. You just tell me what lights you up.
well, there is a novel that I first read in university way back when, and I've read it multiple times since, and I get a different read from it every time. It's called A Map Maker's Dream. I think the author is James Cohen. And it is about a monk that lives in a monastery, and he's a map maker, but he's never left the monastery. So he draws maps based on the stories that travelers and tradesmen bring back to him at the monastery. And it's a really just fast. I'm just in love with this book. It's not a big book. It's very small. I recommend it to everyone and I buy it as gifts. Like, I just love this book because it gets directly to that point of the way people see the world. And, people would bring back their different stories and he's creating this map, but there's conflicting information and people see different animals in different places and they tell different stories and how do you then create a map of the world and what does that map look like through the eyes of so many different individuals from different cultures and backgrounds. So it sort of ties together all of my deep passions in one story. And I just really love that book. I found it really eye-opening the first time I read it. And truly, it's one of those you just read in the bath with a glass of wine. Like, it's just such a great novel. So that's the one that I recommend to everyone,
Well, I'm going to have to go
honestly.
check it out now. So thank
Yeah.
you for that. And I have a tradition on the show where I have a guest leave a question for the next guest.
Mm.
And I'm going to read the question that was left for you.
Oh.
They did not know they were leaving it for you, but here it is. What do you want people to say about you when you are gone?
That is a big
That's a
question.
huge question. You can thank somebody for it.
Oh my gosh. What do I want people to say about me? Whew. Um, I hope that people will say that I thought deeply about things and I cared about people and that I I listened, that I wanted to hear voices, right? I mean, all of my work, everything that I do is trying to encourage and enhance the voices that we don't typically hear or we aren't listening to for whatever systemic reason and bias is in place. Um, and I hope that people see that also, that I'm always learning, that I'm always, if you look at my career over time, I've changed my ideas. I've changed my opinions many times. I mean, if you listen to a podcast from 10 years ago, I probably said very different things than what I say now. So I'm someone who has always been learning and learning and listening and curious and trying to help people to be heard and to express themselves.
That is certainly my
Yeah.
experience of you.
Wow.
And so thank you.
That's a deep question. That was
I
hard.
know. I know. It was. And that
Yeah.
was a beautiful answer. And that's my experience of you in the work that you're doing is this curiosity, not right or wrong, but just let's think about this stuff. Let's
Yeah.
be conscious and aware so
Mhm.
that we can, be in healthier relationships with the people in
Mm,
the world around us. Thank you
mm.
so much for
Thank you for
being
the
on the
question to the
studio.
earlier person.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Thank you for the question to the earlier person from the last show.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And
Thank
I
you.
really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been such a fabulous conversation. Thanks so much.